"You're trespassing!" she shrieked, hurling a half-empty cup of iced coffee at me while I was mowing my own grass. It hit the mower, splashing all over the blades and sputtering into steam. I hadn't even crossed the hedge line, not even close, but there she was, Karen in full HOA regalia, pink visor, clipboard, and fury levels set to hurricane. With one finger jabbing the air like she was conducting an orchestra of lawsuits, she screamed into her phone, "Yes, 911. I have an armed intruder with a dangerous machine." The dangerous machine was a push mower. I hadn't even had my morning coffee yet. That's how the whole mess started, over grass. Not a rare species, not a chemical spill, just plain green lawn. I was trimming the edge of my property like I'd done every Saturday for the past 6 years, and somehow this particular Saturday, it became a federal incident. Karen, who moved in 2 months ago and took over the HOA presidency like a wannabe dictator, had apparently decided that the strip of grass along the old oak tree was her land now. Never mind that the oak tree had been in my family longer than the neighborhood had existed. 2 patrol cars showed up in less than 10 minutes, fastest response time I'd ever seen for this town. I stood there with my mower idling and a confused smile while Karen waved the officers over like she was leading them into battle. There he is. He just crossed my line. He's been harassing me every week. He threatened to burn my hydrangeas. One of the cops blinked and looked at my hands. "Do you have any weapons, sir?" I looked down at my grass-stained gloves. Just a mower and possibly an overdue library book. Karen didn't appreciate the humor. She shoved the crumpled HOA printout into the officer's chest. "It's all here. This is the boundary line, see? It runs right along the driveway and the tree. He's been violating community space every weekend." The officers exchanged a look. One of them, a younger guy who looked like he'd rather be fishing, said, "Man, this is an HOA map. It's not a legal survey." But Karen wouldn't back down. She demanded they issue a trespassing warning. The more I tried to explain, the more irrational she got. She accused me of stalking, of damaging her flower bed last week. I hadn't even touched her yard. And then, in a final dramatic flourish, claimed my dog barked at her grandchild through the fence. I don't have a dog. Never have. She might have been thinking of the Martinez's golden retriever next door, or maybe she was just mixing reality with an episode of her favorite crime show. The cops left without issuing any warning, but the moment they were gone, she marched back to her property, scribbling furiously in a red notebook, like she was building a legal case on every blade of grass I stepped on. By the time the sun went down, she planted small wooden stakes on my side of the yard, each one with a laminated warning. Private HOA property. No trespassing. Violators will be reported. That night, I found an envelope on my front porch. Inside was a formal violation letter from the HOA, citing me for repeated boundary infractions, along with a demand to remove unauthorized lawn care equipment from community land. I nearly choked on my sandwich laughing. It was my mower and my garage on my land. The thing was, Karen wasn't just annoying. She was relentless. Over the next week, she escalated. She started videotaping me with her iPhone anytime I stepped outside. She accused my brother of parking too close to her curb. She even sent a group email to the HOA mailing list accusing me of escalating tension and attempting to bully her into relinquishing property. I didn't even reply. I just mowed my lawn again. But what made me snap was when she had the nerve to hammer a stake right into the roots of the old oak tree. That tree had been planted by my grandfather when he returned from Korea. There was a plaque by its trunk with his name on it. It wasn't just a tree. It was a legacy. And Karen stuck her HOA flag right into it like she was claiming the moon. I knew I had to do something. The police wouldn't intervene unless a crime occurred. The HOA was clearly under her thumb, and I was getting fed up with her marching up and down the imaginary lines in our neighborhood like she was General Karen Patton. That's when I made the call. Not to a lawyer, not to the cops. I called Jackson, the most experienced land surveyor in the entire county. The man had mapped forests, mountains, and an old gold mine dispute back in the 80s. If anyone could settle this nonsense, it was him. When I explained the situation, He chuckled and said, "Sounds like you've got yourself a turf war with a woman who never got over Monopoly." I invited him out the next morning. He said he'd bring the full kit: GPS, records, markers, and the truth. As I hung up the phone, I looked out the window. Karen was across the street, planting more little property markers into what looked suspiciously like my irrigation line. She was holding a ruler like a sword and measuring grass like she was auditing NASA. I didn't know what Jackson would find, but something told me this was going to blow up a lot bigger than either of us expected. I had this weird feeling that Karen's aggressive behavior wasn't just about her obsession with boundaries. It was about hiding something she didn't want anyone to see. The next day, as the sun crept over the horizon, I stood in my backyard waiting for the man with the answers, because the moment that first survey pin dropped, the entire neighborhood was going to find out whose land this really was, and it sure wasn't hers. Jackson arrived just after sunrise, driving an old forest green truck with a rusted toolbox in the back and a GPS rig that looked like it came straight from a spy movie. He stepped out, calm and collected, wearing a faded baseball cap and chewing on sunflower seeds like he was about to enjoy a show. I greeted him at the edge of my driveway, and before we even shook hands, he was already eyeing Karen's marker stakes and raising an eyebrow. "She really staked out your tree," he muttered, popping open a case filled with survey equipment. "Yep," I said, nodding toward the tree where Karen's private HOA land sign now hung like a tacky badge of honor. Jackson spit a seed and chuckled. "I've seen land grabbers before, but this is next-level HOA theater." He got right to work, walking the perimeter with a handheld GPS unit while consulting a printed copy of the county's original plat map. I'd already given him the legal description from my property deed, and he brought along a metal detector to find the original corner pins buried decades ago. As he moved through the lawn making careful notations, Karen came storming out of her front door like she'd been waiting for this moment since sunrise. "Excuse me," she shouted, already halfway down her walkway. "You're not authorized to survey HOA land without a permit." Jackson didn't even look up. "Ma'am, I'm a licensed surveyor. Permits don't apply on private land, and according to the county, this isn't yours." That didn't go over well. Karen stomped back inside, red-faced, probably dialing the HOA board or planning a new flyer campaign. Jackson continued undisturbed, moving methodically. By noon, he paused at a corner near Karen's driveway and motioned for me to join him. "Here's where it gets interesting," he said, pointing at the digital coordinates on his tablet. "This marker right here is the original corner point, confirmed by both the rebar I just found under 4 inches of soil and the GPS triangulation. You see that garage?" I followed his finger, staring at Karen's freshly painted, overly ornate garage with fake shutters and a security camera pointing at my yard. "A third of it is over the property line," Jackson said plainly. "And that patio of hers, the one with the fire pit, that's yours too. All of it." I just stood there blinking. "You're sure?" 100%. "I'll file the official report, but she's been living on a bad plat map for years, and the county's official record overrides anything her little HOA committee printed on Microsoft Paint." My first reaction was disbelief, quickly followed by the strangest feeling of vindication I'd ever experienced. For weeks, she had painted me as some rogue lawn bandit, and now it turned out she was the one squatting on my land. Jackson documented everything: photos, GPS screenshots, coordinates, corner pins. He was thorough, and thank God for that, because I knew this wasn't going to be over with one revelation. As he packed up his gear, I offered him lemonade, and we sat under the oak tree, watching Karen pace back and forth through her front window, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. A few hours later, I gathered all the evidence into a neat folder and decided to give her a chance to hear it from me before things escalated. Against my better judgment, I walked over and rang her doorbell. She opened it halfway, suspicious and fuming. "What do you want?" "I just wanted to show you the results," I said, holding up the folder. "Turns out the official boundary line cuts right through your garage. You're actually sitting on part of my lot." She scoffed like I just told her the moon was made of cheese. "What a joke," she spat. I don't believe a word of it. I calmly held up the signed surveyor's report and pointed to the attached county record. This isn't a joke, Karen. This is the legal boundary. You've been encroaching for years. She tried to snatch the paper from my hand, but I pulled it back. If you want a copy, I'll email it. But from now on, keep your signs off my tree. She slammed the door in my face so hard it rattled the porch lights. I stood there for a second, letting it sink in that this was far from over. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. She was the type to double down. And sure enough, the next morning I woke up to see 3 new signs installed along our shared yard line. This time they were bigger, laminated, and planted deeper into the ground. They said, "Property dispute in progress. Do not trespass. HOA protected area." She was leaning into the drama like it was her personal reality show. I didn't engage. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, a quiet woman named Sophia who was known for dismantling shady land disputes like a surgeon. She reviewed Jackson's report and said, "This is clean. She's toast. You've got a few options. She can pay you for the land, remove the encroachments, or face a quiet title suit. My advice, don't say another word to her. Let me handle it." That suited me just fine. Meanwhile, Karen was still acting like she had the upper hand. That afternoon, I caught her pacing around my driveway with a measuring tape, writing something in her notebook. I was half convinced she was going to accuse my mailbox of trespassing next. Later that evening, Jackson texted me something strange. He said he found a capped-off pipe under Karen's patio while double-checking a corner pin. "Might want to have a plumber look into it," he said. "It's an old installation. Doesn't show on any of her HOA blueprints." That added a new layer of mystery to the situation. What was Karen trying to hide? And why was she so adamant about defending a slice of land she didn't even own? As the sun dipped below the trees, I stood at the edge of the yard, staring at the line she insisted was hers. It wasn't just about property anymore. It was about ego, power, and control. And I had the documents, the survey, and now the law on my side. She could post signs all she wanted. The truth was rooted deeper than any of her laminated lies, and soon enough, the entire neighborhood would know. The game had just changed, and Karen didn't even know how far behind she already was. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded overnight. Karen had made her move, and it was nothing short of theatrical. She posted a photo of herself standing beside her garage, pointing dramatically at one of her newly installed HOA protected area signs. Her caption read, "Urgent notice. A neighbor is trying to illegally seize my property. Please support your HOA president against this harassment." She went on to call me unstable, unworthy, and a danger to community harmony. I stared at the post in disbelief, especially when I saw that half the comments were neighbors offering sympathy and prayers. She had spun the whole thing into a sympathy campaign and somehow was starting to convince people that I was trying to take her house. I didn't respond, not publicly anyway. Sophia had already warned me, don't get sucked into the noise. The truth is in the documents, not in Facebook drama. But it was hard to stay quiet when Karen started distributing flyers. Yes, actual paper flyers. She went door to door, handing out her manifesto like she was campaigning for HOA President of the Year. She accused me of falsifying records, bribing the county clerk, and installing fake survey stakes under cover of darkness. One of my neighbors, a kind elderly woman named Mrs. Patel, brought me a copy and said, "Honey, I know it's all nonsense, but she's really working hard to stir the pot." She even said you were a former con artist. I laughed, but it wasn't funny. The smear campaign was working. People started giving me sideways glances at the mailbox. Someone poured motor oil near my driveway. Another neighbor mysteriously backed into my fence and didn't leave a note. Karen had turned the HOA into a weapon, and I was the target. But she made a mistake. She pushed too far. One evening, just as I sat down for dinner, I heard a loud knock on the door. I opened it to find a young couple from 3 houses down, both visibly upset. "We're so sorry to bother you," the husband said, "but Karen told us you were some kind of land squatter and not even the real owner of this lot." He showed me a printed flyer she had given them. My jaw dropped. She had crossed a legal line now. defamation that directly questioned my ownership of the property. I showed them the survey. I showed them the deed. Within 5 minutes, their attitude shifted entirely. We knew something was off, the wife said. She just seems unhinged. That was the moment I realized that while Karen could stir up fear and gossip, the truth had a weight of its own. One by one, the people she had manipulated would come to see it. Sophia wasn't playing around either. She had already filed the quiet title action and submitted all documentation to the county court. That wasn't all. She had also pulled the building permits from the county office, and the results were gold. Karen's entire garage extension, which was the part sitting on my land, had been built without a permit 10 years ago. No paperwork, no inspection, nothing. It was technically an illegal structure. Sophia grinned when she told me. That makes this more than a property dispute. This is zoning and code violation territory. If she pushes you again, we'll bring the whole thing down like a house of cards. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, which she hosted in her backyard like some kind of Wardham summit. I wasn't invited, of course, but a neighbor recorded part of it and sent me the video. Karen stood under a string of patio lights, wearing a microphone headset, addressing a small crowd as if she were a motivational speaker. We must protect our community, she declared. This is about more than one house. This is about standing up to land fraud and intimidation. She passed around a binder of documents, most of them completely fabricated or misinterpreted, and got the board to issue a cease and desist letter against me for harassment and boundary aggression. Sophia read the letter and rolled her eyes. Total bluff. It has no legal standing. If anything, it helps us. She just made a false claim against you in writing. Still, I couldn't help feeling a bit cornered. Every time I pulled into my driveway, Karen would find an excuse to step outside and glare at me like I was a criminal. One morning, I caught her pointing a security camera toward my kitchen window. Another day, she left a fake citation on my mailbox saying I was in violation of HOA aesthetic standards because my grass was half an inch too long. At this point, I was expecting her to accuse my mailbox of threatening her garden, but things began to shift when I finally started talking to my neighbors face to face, calmly, respectfully. I walked over to the Reynolds house and showed them the real survey. They were stunned. So wait, her garage is on your land. I nodded. And she's calling the cops on you. Another nod. Dan, that's messed up. Word began to spread. I visited the Janellis across the street, the retired couple on the corner, even the high school science teacher who kept bees. Once people saw the evidence with their own eyes, they started putting the pieces together. Karen's empire of lies began to crack. And then came the real shift. One of the HOA board members, a quiet accountant named Ryan, sent me an anonymous email. He had seen the documents and realized Karen had been misusing her power for months. He wanted to talk. We met privately at a local coffee shop, where he showed me HOA expense reports Karen had signed off on, many of which were suspiciously inflated. She billed the HOA $3,000 for security upgrades to her garage, that same garage built illegally on my land. I didn't sign off on any of it. He handed me copies. That was the moment everything changed. Now I had proof that Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a fraud. Sophia was thrilled. This is bigger than a boundary dispute now. She's cooked. She misused funds, built illegally, and defamed you in public. We're going to dismantle her case and her HOA throne piece by piece. That night, I stood by the oak tree, watching the moonlight fall across the property line Karen had tried so hard to redraw with her little signs and stakes. She didn't know it yet, but the war she started over a lawn was about to cost her more than just reputation. It was going to cost her everything. And the best part, I wouldn't have to raise my voice or lift a finger. The law, the neighbors, and the truth were doing all the work. The day the lawsuit notice arrived on Karen's porch was the first time I saw her truly rattled. She stood frozen at her mailbox, holding the thick manila envelope like it had just burned her hand. I watched from across the street as she fumbled with her keys, dropping them twice before disappearing inside without her usual dramatic flourish. No slamming doors, no glares over her shoulder, No fresh steins being hammered into my grass. Just silence. And for once, it felt like progress. Sophia had filed a quiet title action with every ounce of documentation Jackson had collected and added the cherry on top. Photographic proof of the unpermitted construction, misuse of HOA funds, and multiple counts of public defamation. The lawsuit wasn't just about a strip of grass anymore. It was about boundaries in every sense of the word. Still, Karen wasn't going to vanish quietly. The next day, a truck from a private security company rolled up to her house. Out stepped two men who began installing a camera above her garage, one directly facing my house. She called the cops again that evening, claiming I was threatening her by filing a fake lawsuit designed to destabilize her leadership role. The officers, clearly familiar with her by now, gave me a weary smile when I stepped outside. "She says you're using legal warfare," one of them said. I shrugged and replied, "You should see the survey." They didn't press. One of them muttered that they'd have to start charging her for wasting resources soon. I could tell even they were getting tired of the HOA soap opera Karen had turned the neighborhood into. Then came the twist I didn't expect. Sophia got a tip from a clerk at the zoning office who had been combing through permit applications after our case filing. Turns out Karen had attempted to fast-track a variance request just days earlier to retroactively legalize her garage encroachment. She tried to bypass the standard public notice requirement by marking it as an emergency repair request. Sophia was furious. She tried to alter the records before the court date. That's tampering. With that information, Sophia filed for an injunction blocking Karen from making any changes or selling the property until the case was resolved. And we got it. Just like that, Karen's options collapsed. She couldn't sell a home, couldn't alter it, couldn't even build a fence over the disputed zone. What she did next was almost laughable. She filed a complaint with the state real estate board claiming Jackson's survey was fraudulent. But Jackson wasn't just some guy with a measuring tape. He had 30 years of experience, military credentials, and an impeccable record. The complaint was dismissed almost immediately, and the board issued a warning about filing false claims. Karen's desperation was beginning to stink up the whole neighborhood. A few neighbors who had initially supported her started removing the signs she'd handed out. One even posted in the Facebook group, "I trusted Karen, but I've seen the court docs. She's lied to all of us. We deserve better." The neighborhood that once whispered about me was now starting to whisper about her, and louder. One by one, people came to me to talk, to ask for the truth, and I gave it to them without spin, just the facts. The survey, the lawsuit, the fraud. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just wanted my land back and my peace restored. But in the process, I become the symbol of reason in a neighborhood that had been slowly suffocating under Karen's petty rule. And then came Ryan. Ryan, the quiet HOA board member who had slipped me the fraudulent financial reports, decided he'd had enough. He drafted a motion for a vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. The bylaws required a majority vote by the board, followed by a special meeting with the community to confirm removal. Karen, of course, tried to block it. She accused Ryan of conspiring with me, of orchestrating a coup, of trying to de-HOA the neighborhood. It was absurd. But Ryan had allies, and one of them was the HOA treasurer, who had been sitting on her own concerns for months. Together, they called the emergency meeting. The night of the meeting was unforgettable. It was held in the community park, under strings of lights and folding chairs. Karen arrived flanked by a couple of die-hard supporters, but their energy faded fast when Ryan calmly presented the financial discrepancies, followed by a summary of the lawsuit and a copy of the zoning violation. The air grew still. Karen tried to speak, to explain it all away as a misunderstanding, but her voice cracked. For the first time, she didn't sound confident. She sounded cornered. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't gloat. I stood up and quietly said, "I didn't ask for any of this. I just wanted to mow my grass in peace. But no one, not even the HOA president, is above the law." That line got a quiet round of applause. The vote was taken. Karen lost, 4-1. She was officially removed as OA president. Someone suggested I take the role, but I declined immediately. I wasn't looking for power. I was looking for closure. The board appointed the treasurer, a kind but firm woman named Alicia, to serve as interim president until the next election. The mood in the neighborhood changed overnight. People waved again. Kids played on the sidewalks without being shushed away for violating noise ordinances. And Karen, she locked herself in for 3 days straight. But the final blow came not from the court, but from the county inspector. Based on the zoning report Sophia had uncovered, they launched their own investigation into Karen's property. The result: a formal notice requiring partial demolition of the unpermitted garage extension. She could apply for a full rebuild permit, but only after a fine of nearly $12,000 and approval from zoning and code enforcement. Her precious garage was now an expensive pile of trouble, and she couldn't even sell the house to get out from under it until the quiet title lawsuit was resolved. I watched the inspector hammer the orange notice into her front lawn from my porch. There was no joy in it, no celebration, just a quiet moment of justice finally finding its mark. Karen came outside 10 minutes later, tore the notice down, and threw it into her trash. But the world had changed around her. The neighbors no longer saw her as a leader. The law no longer feared her threats, and the land she thought she ruled now belonged, officially and unquestionably, to me. All I did was mow my grass, but in doing so, I cut down something much bigger than a lawn. I cut down her illusion of control. The court date arrived on a bright Tuesday morning, and by then, the entire neighborhood seemed to know what was at stake. A few curious neighbors even made the drive into town just to sit in the back row and see if the rumors were true, that the almighty HOA president was about to lose a chunk of her house and the fantasy kingdom she'd ruled for months. Karen walked into the courtroom dressed like she was attending a funeral, all black with oversized sunglasses, flanked by a lawyer who looked as tired as he was underpaid. I sat beside Sophia, calm and composed, while Jackson sat behind us with his survey maps rolled up and ready like arrows in a quiver. The judge wasted no time. After both sides made their opening statements, Sophia presented everything in neat, brutal order: the survey, the photos, the GPS coordinates, the zoning violations, the fraudulent permit history, even the financial records that exposed Karen's misuse of HOA funds. The evidence was a tsunami, and Karen's lawyer tried to fight it with a paper cup. At one point, Karen interrupted the proceedings to claim that I had manipulated the earth, and that the ground had shifted the property line. The judge blinked at her in disbelief. Sophia didn't even respond to that nonsense. She just handed over a geological report confirming there had been no soil movement in the area for over a decade. That moment sealed it. The judge leaned forward, tapped the papers, and said, "This is not a close case." He ruled in my favor. The garage and patio built on my land were deemed encroachments. The construction was confirmed unpermitted, and Karen was ordered to remove the structures within 60 days or purchase the land from me at 3 times the appraised value, plus legal fees and damages for defamation. Karen's jaw dropped. She tried to protest, but the gavel came down before she could stand. It was over just like that. Outside the courthouse, local reporters from a small-town newspaper were waiting. Someone had tipped them off. They asked for a statement, but I declined politely. I wasn't interested in headlines. I just wanted my yard back, my space, and maybe one good night of sleep without waking up to a new sign planted in my soil. Karen stormed out behind me, trying to hide from the cameras, but the damage was done. By the time I got home, the story was already posted online, and someone had pasted it to the community bulletin board at the park. The headline read, "HOA President Loses Property Dispute, Ordered to Tear Down Part of Home." The fallout was swift. Karen, who once paraded around with her clipboard like she was running for office, became a recluse overnight. No more patrols, no more flyers. The new HOA president, Alicia, started undoing the ridiculous rules Karen had passed during her reign, including the one about mailbox paint colors and maximum wind chime length. Neighbors came together again. People hosted cookouts, invited each other over, and for the first time in months, the air felt lighter. I wasn't just the guy who mowed his lawn anymore. I was the guy who stood his ground, who didn't back down when someone tried to redraw the truth. Then came demolition day. Karen waited until the last week of the court-ordered deadline. Early one morning, a construction crew arrived with tools, hard hats, and a county inspector watching closely. She had tried every trick in the book: last-minute appeals, delays, even a GoFundMe campaign that raised only $42 before being flagged for misleading information. But in the end, she had no choice. I stood by my oak tree and watched the garage wall come down, piece by stubborn piece. The patio went next. The fire pit she once used for HOA meetings reduced to rubble. Karen stayed inside the whole time, blinds drawn, pretending the outside world didn't exist. Jackson dropped by to see the cleanup. He handed me a thermos of strong black coffee and gave me a nod. "You held your line, Alex." A lot of folks would have folded. I thanked him and watched the backhoe clear out the last of the debris. The old property line was now visible again, like an old scar that had finally healed. And just when I thought the whole saga had ended, Jackson pointed to something sticking out of the dirt beneath the torn-up patio. "That's odd," he said, walking over and brushing away the soil. It was a capped pipe, thick and old, and it extended toward my property. "This isn't a utility line," Jackson said. "Looks like a capped-off well pipe." Curious, I called a local contractor to inspect it, and what he found floored me. The pipe was connected to a deep well drilled decades ago, long before the HOA existed. It had been capped but never officially registered as closed, which meant it was still legally recognized. And according to county records, the land surrounding it belonged entirely to me. That well came with water rights, which had been rolled into my deed but had never been mentioned by Karen or the HOA. Sophia did some digging and discovered that Karen had been drawing water from that line illegally for years, probably used for her elaborate garden and sprinkler system, which explained her obsession with that strip of land. When Sophie presented the evidence to the county, they fined Karen again for unauthorized use of a private resource. The fine wasn't massive, but it was symbolic. It meant her last grip on that land had crumbled entirely. As a final insult to her pride, she was forced to remove the sprinkler system she'd once boasted about in every HOA meeting. The lawn she fought so hard for was now just dry dirt, empty and silent. Weeks passed. I rebuilt my fence, replanted my grass, and even installed a little bench beneath the oak tree. Neighbors stopped by regularly, not just to chat but to thank me, not for winning the lawsuit, but for standing up when it counted. Karen eventually put her house up for sale, though not without another petty stunt, listing it with a fake square footage number that was immediately corrected after inspection. She moved out one bitter afternoon, her SUV packed to the brim. Not a single goodbye to anyone on the street. No one came to see her off. As I sat on my porch watching her drive away, I realized how much this little corner of the world had changed. A simple dispute over a lawn turned into a battle for truth, a legal war, and a neighborhood awakening. I didn't ask for it, but I faced it, and in doing so, I earned something far greater than property. I earned peace, real peace, the kind that doesn't come from silence, but from knowing that when push comes to shove, the truth still has weight, and no matter how many signs someone plants, the ground doesn't lie.